I'm Daniel Steeves with the Beyond Cloud series of discovery discussions presented by Intelligent HQ and hosted at Groupe INSEEC London. Welcome to the Beyond Cloud series of discovery discussions, where over the next 15 weeks we're going to be taking the perspectives and angles of 15 different players across the cloud industry and taking a look at the same 4 questions from all of those angles. First up will be David Terrar in the role of the cloud consultant. With a background not dissimilar to mine and with a pretty common set of client targets, we still attack things and approach things from a slightly different angle, with David often taking a bit of the cloud evangelist role. So David, tell me a little bit about what being the cloud consultant means, what your business does, and how that's changed recently and over the years, particularly in terms of risks and opportunities.
Okay, that's good. Well, I guess as a consultant, we're all about advising our clients, and my company D2C, we basically do practical business advice for companies, and we provide cloud solutions for certain types of businesses. On the advice side of things, it's about social media strategy, how to go about adopting the cloud, how you pick and choose between a good cloud provider and a bad cloud provider, and picking the right solution, that kind of thing. So it's all about good practical advice and finding out what works for a particular client. And then we have some solutions in our kit bag for building websites and web communities and online accounting and online CRM and ERP, the whole business process for some companies. Where that's appropriate for the type of company, we recommend ours, and where it's not, we help them find the right solution. That's our approach to it. And actually, we started our company because we were, back in 2004, frustrated with the fact that people weren't tackling this topic properly. And that actually, although we didn't call it cloud back in 2004, it was software as a service. We only work with cloud applications and cloud solutions, but our background and history is with the on-premise world. 35 years of implementing different kinds of ERP and finance. If you think of a solution, we'll have implemented it somewhere. And for me, the big difference in the cloud approach compared to the old on-premise approach is to do with risk. Before, it was my customers who were taking all the risk, because they were buying hardware and software and a project up front and then implementing it, and maybe it worked, but they'd taken all the risk by paying for it up front. Whereas today with cloud solutions, I can try it before I buy it, and I can set up a small pilot and try it for a few weeks. And that makes it completely different. It means that the risk now is all with the service provider. I have to provide a good service, because if I don't, my customer will just test mine out, decide it's not good enough, and go and choose someone else's. So I've got to make it work for them to continue to subscribe to my service.
I can understand that, and I see where you're showing how the risk has been adjusted, but I think that if you're starting to talk about the larger systems, I have a feeling I'm disagreeing with you a little bit, because I believe that there are not cloud providers that are out there that are going to create a bespoke system for you, right? Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about small businesses and we're talking about removing barriers to getting into computing and to use computing for their business, it's one thing. But when you're talking about a major central government department or a 400,000 users across the world needing a new system, that's not the sort of thing that you're just going to be able to pop up a little bit simply and easier. I think it may be a shorter route, and there may be some savings that are along the way, but has it really changed for major complex implementation?
I believe it has, but I think that part of what you're talking about there is to do with the fact that the larger enterprise systems, there is less choice around because of where we're at in the marketplace. And actually that the likes of SAP and Oracle have their conventional offerings, and they have some cloud offerings. Mm-hmm. But actually, when you look at those bigger IT shops and what they need to do, I think that pretty much most of the time there ought to be a sensible cloud offering as an alternative to the on-premise or doing it the bespoke, old-fashioned way. We just haven't quite got there yet. But however, it's a big topic, and you know, there are a lot of people that say cloud isn't for everybody. From my point of view, rather than get into that kind of philosophical argument, I'd much prefer to talk to customers and say, actually, you know, you can get some quick wins with a cloud approach here and here and here, and actually get you know, be more agile as a business, do things more quickly, and save some money at the same time. And so, you know, a cloud approach will work in many situations. And I actually think if we come back in 5 years' time, you know, we won't be having this conversation because almost all of the solutions will be cloud-based in some fashion.
When I think of social media, I think the word social is redundant. When I think about cloud computing, the word cloud is becoming redundant. With big data, the word big is redundant. It really is a matter of scale and what really matters to you. But again, when you're talking SAPs and Oracles, I appreciate their offerings and their products, but are there not still massive amounts of systems being produced that take 50,000 man-years to produce a back-office accounting system for a manufacturing facility in a country undetermined somewhere? Those opportunities, they can still save money,
yeah,
but you still haven't got cloud delivering great economies to the development efforts and the complexities of the systems. I think that's something that cloud can help us to do it better, but I don't know that cloud's going to solve all of the problems that we've created over the years.
I mean, and this is, we can get into a big philosophical argument about that, but I think, I guess what I'd say is that I've lived through a whole load of technology disruptions since I came into the business in the 70s. The shift from mainframe to mini computers to 81 when I was in IBM when the IBM personal computer was announced in 81, to kind of distributed PCs, and then moving on to client server and version 1 of the web. Each one of those disruptions,
and back sometimes.
Yeah, and then back sometimes. Yeah, but each one of those disruptions was a big disruption. New players emerge. Some of the existing players, you know, can't make the jump. And those kind of disruptions have been, you know, every 5 or 10 years in history. Today is different. Today we have 3 disruptions happening simultaneously, and that's never happened before. We've got the shift to cloud, and all the stuff we can argue around cloud. We've got the shift to social, and we've got these things. We're walking around with the internet in our hands, and the confluence of cloud, mobile, and social together makes it a different ballgame. It changes everyone's business model. So it doesn't matter whether you're in retail, or you're in manufacturing, or you're in publishing, or you're in education. The fact that I have access to applications on the web through one of these, and I can communicate with my customers and my partners in a different way with social media, changes the game for everybody. So in my opinion, that changes all of this kind of conventional way of doing IT. You have to think differently, and most organisations are going to have to change a lot of their business model from end to end. I mean, the way they sell the product, the way they market the product, the way they compensate their sales force, the way they support the product, the way they do the training, the way they actually do the documentation, the way they develop the product. Everything changes. So for me, it's the biggest shift, you know, within IT in 35, 40 years that I've been in it.
It's interesting because over these 30 years that I've been in it as well, the shifts tend to happen to people as opposed to with people. And a lot of the changes that have occurred over the past, people still haven't yet caught up with them. So I think a change of thinking, a transformation of how you look at stuff is very necessary. This segues quite nicely into our second question as well. As you mentioned, we've got lots of the next big things that have happened. We've got a few big things happening at once, which kind of creates, in many ways, a perfect storm, which can be good or can be bad, depending on your positioning relative to the storm. What I'd like to hear from you, though, is why is this next big thing so much different than the last big thing? Particularly since I see a lot of people spending money to do what they had done before, but putting it into the cloud, which may not necessarily have been the right step if you want to maximize on the investments that you have from the past. So why is it so different?
Well, for that, I actually quote from a wonderful Douglas Adams science fiction book called Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, where he talks about the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. And that's what it's all about. It's the interconnectedness of all things. And this is kind of IT's perspective on things like the long tail and the flat world basically, for me, the key difference is that this levels the playing field for all of the players. It means that as a small business, I can put together my solution on somebody else's world-class infrastructure. And so I can compete with an IBM or an Oracle as a small business in a way that I never could 10 years ago or 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And then when it comes to me having an idea, if you and I had an idea about a product now, this afternoon we could rent the hardware to build it. We could find some developers to start doing it. The barrier to entry to innovating a new idea and starting it, getting off the ground, and then doing all the things around it that I need to do, like marketing and the like. Suddenly I can, social media comes in to help me do that. So really, the biggest difference, why this is different from the previous disruptions, is the fact that everyone can play, and I don't have to have a huge amount of money to start.
We won't, as you've said earlier, get too philosophical, but I guess part of the issue that I have with it is, and people call me a cynic, but I tend to think of it more as realism, there are going to be a lot of people that are now enabled to do stuff that they probably shouldn't have. There's going to be a lot of money spent, there's going to be a lot of time and effort wasted. Now, some of this is a growing aspect of how the economy and how capitalism works in general, but the fact that we're enabling people to waste money, is that our responsibility to, as a cloud provider, to tell them that that's a bad idea, or should we just have somebody take the money because they want to spend it?
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, this is Darwin's theory of evolution applied to business, and the fact that what happens in evolution is that new animals emerge, and basically we're in a situation where all of the categories are fragmenting, and we've got new categories. It doesn't matter whether it's publishing or it's TV. We've got loads more channels today than we did have 10 years ago, or whatever. So basically, loads more choice. From that point of view, yes, there are going to be potentially more waste, but I also think that it means that people with good ideas will rise to the top in a way that they never could before. And so hopefully the good ideas and the good innovation will actually have breathing space to actually come along and help people. So I've got a very kind of glass half full kind of positive view of this, because I actually think it's going to lead to more creativity and more innovation and more choice for the end consumer, and that's the key reason why I'm so excited about it.
I can see that, and I prefer a half full glass as well myself, but I do worry a little bit about the amount of people that I see that are doing startups. The concern that I have of it's not that it's bad for them or for the business, because there's lots of lessons that are going to be learned, but I just wonder about how many people that could do things because it's too enabled for them. But
I think that the beauty of the current startup world is that it's so easy to start, it's so easy to get help and advice, and also we live in a world where I was talking to my son the other day. He was talking about something to do with his creative writing, and I talked about a particular scene in Annie Hall where Christopher Walken is talking to Woody Allen, and as I was explaining this, I actually went over to this and I typed into YouTube and I found the clip from that movie from 1977 or whenever it is, and I showed it to him. So the fact that we live in a world where within a minute of me having that idea, I can find it and show it to someone, is what makes the difference. So there's much more help available through this thing.
And it's amazing, having grown up with 2 TV channels to start with, and with black and white telly, I take this for granted that I can do exactly what you've just said. To me, it's an extension, and the fact that I've been a techie for more than 30 years probably makes it a little bit easier, but my 83-year-old German father-in-law uses an iPad on a regular basis, as does his wife. They communicate with it, they look up the news, they chat with their families on Skype, and it has become as natural an extension as the remote control is for your television. This brings us around, though, from a little bit of what you were saying to the rearing head of regulation that I hear an awful lot of talk about, both when we're having discussions with our colleagues and peers. There's a lot of discussions about it. We've got Nelly Cruz from the EU making a lot of statements that don't make an awful lot of sense, which also concerns me when you get politicians and this nature involved. I personally don't think regulation in our space is something that is necessary. I think it's a Darwinian theory of business, VHS, beta. You make the right decisions with the wrong technology, and you win. That can happen today as well in the same way. And I think that it's kind of a buyer beware type of environment, and I personally think regulation is just going to be a bunch of bureaucratic overhead without any ability to monitor and enforce, or to enforce it. What do you think?
Well, it's a complicated area. I mean, as it happens, just this morning I was putting a comment into a press release for the Cloud Industry Forum on exactly this topic. And I guess my view is that we definitely need standards. We definitely need a way of being able to pick and choose between a good cloud provider and a bad cloud provider. So certification and standards and some form of regulation has to be a good thing.
Sorry, I want to jump in. Why is that different today than 10 years ago to have somebody to tell me whether I should buy HP or IBM or Sun?
It's not, but the complication is that it is that much more complicated today because there's so much more choice, and it's so easy for me. I mean, it's very easy for me. I can have a really cool website and be providing my service. And you don't necessarily know what's behind it. You don't know whether my IT infrastructure behind that really cool website with a really good web app could be 3 servers in the corner of the room with no backup, or it could be servers with the most sophisticated disaster recovery imaginable in in a nuclear bunker somewhere. And there's a huge difference between those two extremes. But my website's a really cool website, and you might buy it just because I'm good at the core thing. So how do I pick and choose between those things? So I think 2 things. I think regulation is good, but over the years we've always had standards. We've always had things like ISO 9001 and the like. However, I remember a time back a couple of decades ago where to get the job I needed to have those labels on my letterhead. But to get those labels cost me many tens of thousands of pounds. Yes. And actually, whether they really did improve the quality of what I did is questionable, because all it really meant was that I was documenting what I do properly. I might be doing rubbish, but if it's properly documented, I got the label. So from my point of view, and the reason that I'm involved in this Cloud Industry Forum I mentioned a minute ago is to make sure that those, whatever we come up with, is affordable for the little guy. So I believe we need standards. I believe we need those kind of things to help people, but we have to make sure that the EU and governments don't actually impose so much regulation that it's only the big IT players that can afford to get the quality mark. So we have to make the barrier to entry to getting this low enough so that little companies like mine can afford to do it, as well as IBM and Microsoft. So definitely a good thing, but we've got to make sure that it's affordable for the SME, otherwise we'll be stifling the innovation that I was talking about 10, 15 minutes ago.
I've heard the same arguments before, and I'm sorry, we're going to have to just agree to disagree for it for the moment, because I'm thinking, if I go to a used car lot and it turns out that it's a chop shop with a bunch of stolen things and a bunch of broken machines and oil pans that fall apart when you drive onto the street, and I buy the car anyway, there's no government agency to protect me. Oh. If I buy a television from a place that I go back the next day and they're gone, there's no government regulation to protect me, and I don't think in the business place that there's really any need for it. But
I would argue that when you're buying that TV, there are standards. There's a electricity standard, kite mark or whatever it is on it. So that helps. If I'm buying Wi-Fi devices, the fact that we've actually got a standard for Wi-Fi, that helps.
Yeah, it's a different type of standard, but I appreciate it.
I think standards are good, providing they're not too much of an overhead to business. However, you are different. You're right. At the end of the day, it's buyer beware. The Cloud Industry Forum, for example, have a code of practice that's all about transparency. And making sure that companies actually publish properly how it is they go about the job. And that's what it should be about. It shouldn't be about trying to impose particular technical standards. It should be about making sure organisations are transparent about the way they do it, so that if it's a chop shop, I know it's a chop shop rather than somebody pretending to be a Jaguar dealership.
No, I can appreciate that as well, and I want honesty to be required, and I mean that's the laws that we are meant to have anyway in terms of projecting your products with an honest reality about what they can do. We have two different devices on the table. We have two different standards here, both imposed by their own companies, and they both cause additional expenses to the business world that wants to use them, or to the application developer that wants to go into the different formats. And that's only two out of many. That's kind of the way that the business has worked. If you make the wrong choice, you lose. It is very, very Darwinian. So from your Darwinian statement, I'll argue the regulation contradicts your Darwinian balance. But I do see your perspective, and I do know that there's a lot of dishonesty and there's a lot of things that could be done better. But that's our industry policing itself rather than the other, in my opinion.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yes, exactly. So that brings us to the final question, where we want to talk a little bit about where we're going to be going with this. I think of cloud as, and a lot of people don't like this necessarily, especially the cloud people, the providers, but I think of it as the plumbing. It's the motorway. We've got a motorway, we've got lots of nice on-ramps and exit ramps, and we've got some service stations along the way. What is the motorway of the cloud taking us to? Where are we going to be going, and do you think the motorway is going to change much along the way?
I think where next is actually kind of what people are talking about with the Internet of Things. So I think that the fact that we have applications that are just there on whatever device we've got, and the fact that we are connecting with our customers and partners and suppliers in the ways that we are, that's all kind of reducing the friction to getting things done. And I think the real next innovation is all to do with the user experience. It's all to do with making it easy. That's why you just mentioned about these things. We've got a touch screen interface and a way of working with technology, which we don't have to teach our kids. A 3-year-old can come along and start to use this thing.
They often teach the parents.
And you see them. You see them in coffee shops. Taking mum and dad's iPhone or iPad and playing games on there. And no one's had to run a training course or make them read a manual. And I think that's what's different now compared to the kind of desktop PC world that we've lived through for the last 20 or 30 years. And so the next thing is all about connecting things in a more frictionless way. And so I think devices having their own intelligence, the cost associated with RFID tags and sensors and all that kind of thing means that the applications will stop just being based on our devices. They'll start to spread into the other devices that are around, so that when I go into a shop, this thing will the shop will sense that I'm me coming in with this device and start to tell me things. So I think it's all about really the Internet of Things kind of approach and everything connecting.
I can't disagree at all. In the Internet of Things, when we're talking 20 billion plus devices within the next few years, additional to what we've already had, according to Cisco, it's a big thing. And it's funny, we're coming back to these devices again because this is the space where I think standards and regulation are a lot more important, because then we have things that are usable and functional across the board. Much of what we've seen in computers over the decades that we've been looking at them, and it's amazing it's decades now, is that capabilities are enabled that people can't actually harvest, right? When we remember the first PC, probably the first application that came out was kitchen recipes. So why don't you take all of your cookbooks and all your recipe sheets and go into your little home office and type them all into your computer, and then go back to the kitchen, and when you want a recipe, go to the home office and print it out and come back. So yes, it's an application of computer technology, but it's one of those ones that drove me throughout my career to focus on why is it doing what it's doing, what do we need it for, where are we making money or saving money, or which problem are we solving. And a lot of what's happening, we've got a lot of problems to solve, and there's 100 different views on 100 different problems, but probably only 2 of them are really needed to be fixed for everybody. So we've got a higher signal-to-noise ratio than I think that we've ever had before. We have the capabilities of technologies unlike what we've ever had before. The sizes of the pipes to move the data, the processing capability to crunch the data, and the unbelievable cheapness of storage to track all of this stuff. I mean, the phenomenal amounts of data that we're talking about today, we couldn't have afforded to store in the past. So part of why we are where we are is because of where we came from. And I'm finding that it's a lot more exciting and kind of reinvigorating again, because our industry suddenly has an awful lot more openings and opportunities, and an awful lot less barrier for anybody to use the technology to deliver things that are going to ultimately be better for us and the people to follow.
I totally agree. In fact, the complication, and one of the things that will differentiate the companies that succeed, I think, is the fact that for this thing, I can choose between 300,000 apps. And so part of you mentioned noise, the signal to noise thing. Part of the complication is that there's always an app for it, but how do I find that particular app? So I think that it's going to be the organisations that use intelligence in some fashion, picked up from data. I mean, data's always been important, but now we call it big data, and suddenly it's a really big thing. But we're calling it big data because we now have, like you said, the processing power to make use of it, and the storage capacity so that I can collect as much of it as I want. So suddenly I can put those things together with some intelligence and do something clever that I never could do before. I mean, I could have tried to do it, but I wouldn't have been able to afford to do it. Today it's now affordable. So I think that where we're heading is actually making intelligence out of that, and making it so that I don't have to happen to have installed the right one of the 300,000 apps on my iPad. That something senses that I need this, I need the menu in the kitchen, and it automatically arrives on my iPad.
Thanks very much, David. I think this was a really good start to our cloud series, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you in about 15 weeks and taking a look at what some of our colleagues and competitors and everything that comes in between have to say along the way. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel.